We are in a tough series. Some of you, it's your first Sunday at our church, and you said, oh, great, they're talking about money. Because here's what everybody tells themselves. I don't need to go to church. All those Christians do is tell people how bad they are and occasionally tell everybody to give money to the church. This series is not a series focused on increasing our giving as a church. I mentioned last week that we have had record years. As a matter of fact, every year since our church started 9 years ago has been a record year. Our giving has grown. The focus of our series for these few weeks is really a response to what we've seen in our church. Our church has given more to missions and outreach this year, but we've also given more to benevolence. There are needs within our church that we are constantly caring for one another. And one of the things we've realized is that often people don't know how to handle their money. They don't know how to honor God with their money, but they also don't know how to handle their money in a way that honors God as a good steward. We're not even talking about giving at this point. We're just talking about being good stewards of the resources we receive. And so as we get started with this series, last week we talked about the heart of money and what it can do to our heart when we love it, when we have this unnatural desire for it. And today we're going to get a little more practical and ask this question: how should we use money? If it is capable of doing good and being a help, as we read last week, but it's also capable of being a hazard to our heart, as we read last week, as Jesus and Paul clearly laid out, it can be good, it can be something that harms your heart, it can be used for good, then how should we use it? And as we get started this morning, I want to ask you a question about just gifts. I want to ask you what the best gift you were ever given was. Not the most expensive, not the biggest, not the smallest, not the most valuable, but a gift that maybe it was an under $5 gift, an under $20 gift. Maybe there was a threshold, and you were just impressed with how someone took the time to be thoughtful and to be generous and give you something that you weren't expecting. I'm going to show you two gifts that I've been given this morning. One I'll share with you at the end of the service, and it's very small. The other is the Bible I'm actually preaching from. I preach from this Bible most Sundays. It was given to me when I was 16 years old by my cousin. In the front of the Bible, he wrote a little note. It's a quote from D.L. Moody that says, "This book will keep you from sin, and sin will keep you from this book." I read it often to remind myself of the power of the Word of God. Not the physical, this book isn't somehow special, it's the Word of God. These are God's words, Holy Spirit inspired for us. But as you think about a good gift you've been given before, I want you to remind yourself what made it a good gift. They thought about you. They thought maybe what you needed, what you most desired. They didn't just go and haphazardly pick up something that says 4 men at TJ Maxx or 4 women at fill-in-the-blank store that ladies like. They thought about you personally. What could be useful for you? What they understood was the inherent value of that gift to you. And this morning, we're really going to be talking about value, because when we talk about money, we're talking about how to value our time, because really, money is an exchange for time. We assign dollar signs to it, but really what we're talking about is years of work, years of effort, years of investment. And last week, we looked at a teaching of Jesus that was clear-cut, and it's right to the point. And as usual, Jesus, when he talks about money, he tends to talk in parables. So this morning, we're going to read a parable called The Rich Fool. I'll be reading from Luke chapter 12. I'll read verses 13 through 15 to get us started. Before Jesus even tells the parable, we're told of a problem that was taking place that a young man wanted Jesus to solve for him. Notice what it says. It says, "Someone in the crowd said to him, 'Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me.'" Back then, the oldest son usually was not only the one who received the greatest portion of the will, he was often the executor of the will. And so here we have a younger brother, more than likely, who has an older brother who's not dividing the will in a way that the younger brother thinks honors the dad, the brothers, you name it. Verse 14, "But Jesus said to him, he said to him, 'Man, who made me a judge or arbiter over you?' Jesus wisely says, 'I'm not here to get into the deep, dark crevices of your father's financial past and what you own or should own. Verse 15, he said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all covetousness. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." Now that's funny, because that straight up contradicts the lies that I see online and in culture and on the TV screen that convince me and do their best to convey to me that if I had more, I'd be more. If I had more, I'd truly be living. So Jesus says, hey, your life is so much more than that. Jesus is directly combating some of the lies that money tells, and we talked about them last week, but I just want to remind you what some of those money lies are. Money lies in a couple of different ways. First of all, money lies when it says, if I have more, I'll be more alive. This is what we do. Hey, we'll really be living when we retire. Hey, we'll really be living when we get a bigger house. Hey, we'll really be living when we get that raise. Hey, we'll really be living when we can afford to go on better vacations. We'll really be living. Hey, my friends are really living because they have this and I don't have it. And so Jesus says your life is more than the abundance of your possessions. But we tend to think, no, if I had more, I'd really be alive. But truly, most of us today, more than likely, you have more possessions than you did 20 years ago, and I would ask you, do you feel more alive? The second lie money tells is if I lose my money, I lose everything. This is one of the great fears of the American mind. What if the stock market crashes? What if my home isn't worth enough when I get to retirement? What if I don't have enough in my 401k? What if? And our real fear is, what if we lose everything? And money says, hey, if you just hold on to me, don't lose me, you'll have what you really need. And the truth is, every one of us are one day going to lose everything here. And we lie to ourselves and say, but if I have enough money, or, and this is the lie that the man in our parable today believed, if I have more, I'll rest easier. I've talked with enough individuals who have high net worths or can't believe how God has blessed them to know that the more things you own, the more things you have to manage, the more responsibilities you have. Often, the less rest you're able to receive. With that being said, let's look at the very next verse. Jesus says, be aware, be on guard against covetousness. And then in verse 16 it says, and he told them a parable, saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. Before we read verse 17, don't miss this. The problem is not that he was rich. It's not that he was productive. It's not that he was blessed. That was not the issue. You should not come to a message on money and walk away saying, success is bad. No, God often blesses. And in this case, we see that his land produced plentifully. That is a blessing from God. God made it where when my wife and I started a garden this year, I say my wife and I very loosely, my wife and occasionally me out there saying, how you doing? Looks good. When she started a garden, my son was blown away when we would plant these little seeds. And what would come from these seeds? Produce of all kinds. Vegetables, fruits, things we could eat. And the thing that it produced came with seed to produce more. I heard it said a while back, only God's economy would give us something like an apple that if you eat it, it's not consumed. It's now able to produce more because of the seeds you've discovered as you've been eating that apple. Only God's economy works that way. It said his land produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, if you highlight or underline, you should underline, he thought to himself. Most of us find ourselves in the opposite situation of this man. This man woke up and found himself overwhelmed with wealth and riches and said, Most of us wake up and we find ourselves overwhelmed with bills and debt, right? And we think to ourselves, but here is where the parable matters. What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. Do you understand the disconnect already? It's hard for us to imagine because today, if you're hungry, there's a food bank around the corner. You could go get food. There are drive-through food banks. It's never been easier in America to get your hands on food. And if you're here and you do not have food for your family, as we always say, stay after the service, talk to somebody. We will get you connected. There are multiple food banks that our church gives to and supports. But back then, the average worry was not 401k or economies. Most people were living hand to mouth, and they rarely had more than 2 to 3 days of food in storage in their home. And here this man, he is blessed and prosperous, and he is surrounded by abject poverty, more than likely. And his response is, but where can I store all this food? Do you also sense that it's kind of unwise? Think about this. His point is not how can I sell more, how can I give more, how can I distribute more, it's how can I hold more. Brothers and sisters, there was no refrigerated storage back then. This is a foolish notion to begin with. Verse 18, he said, I will do this. Now, he hasn't done anything yet. We are living right now in his mind. He's taken no action, just thought. Most of our lives are won and lost right here in our minds and what we think about God and his will, his word, or what he says about us or what we believe about ourselves. He said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns. Now, that's wild. You already have barns. Why not build some more? No, I'm going to tear those down, and I'm going to build larger barns. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. He already knows he's going to have lots of goods. He's going to have much wealth. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. This parable still relates, and boy, it hits today. Here's what he's saying. Soul, you have enough in your 401k that you don't ever have to worry again. And what we're saying when we say this is, my rest, my peace, my security, it comes from that. Relax, eat, drink. This is wild. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. These are some of this is the language Jesus is going to use with his disciples. He's like, come with me. My yoke is easy, it's light. And he's going to use some of the same language, but his point is, don't come with me and get rich, and that's where you're going to find your peace, your joy, your satisfaction. His point is, you're going to have me, you're going to have a relationship with God. But this guy says, oh, here's how I can relax, rest, and be happy. And brothers and sisters, the man in this parable lives on today in every human heart. This is how I might have some satisfaction. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? Can we pause there for a moment? I've spent some time in the last few weeks with brothers and sisters in our church who've lost parents, who've lost family members. And as is always the case, it's a sobering reminder of why we should have our affairs in order. A close friend of mine, his dad made sure everything was taken care of with the funeral home, which made it so much easier. My grandfather, before he died, he purchased everything to make it easier. His affairs were in order, but most of us, our affairs are not in order. And the question God poses to him is, who's going to own your stuff? What good was all this effort in your mind of what you're going to do? Your soul is required in the things you prepared. Whose will they be? Verse 21. So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. This phrase, rich toward God, only happens here. It's a very unique phrasing of this language in the Greek. We'll talk more about what that means, but Jesus says, here's the point. He had an opportunity, God blessed him, and his response was to store up for himself. It was all about him. Never a thought of God, never a thought of others, never a thought of anyone but himself. And Jesus takes painstaking effort to make sure the guy doesn't mention family, he doesn't mention friends, he doesn't mention anyone. He's just like, it's all about me. Now, the point of this parable is not that it's bad to be prosperous, promoted, or well paid. The point is that God took issue with how this man responded to the wealth, the blessing, the produce, the promotion, the prosperity that was placed in his hand. I want to key in on one verse, verse 19. It says, "And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry." When blessed with this prosperity, I think there are two opportunities that this man had. The rich fool could have first of all said, what good could I do with this wealth? And this is really Jesus' frustration with this man in the teaching. He gets this blessing, and his first thought is not, how can I be good? How can I be generous? What good can I do? Instead, he thought, how can I hoard this? How can I make sure that it's always there for me and me alone? I got to have bigger barns. I got to make sure it's protected so that only I enjoy this. I mentioned to you the phrasing, not rich toward God, verse 21, so is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. In my Bible, there's a little reference to Habakkuk there. It's not the same wording, but it's a passage where the people of God were blessed and they withheld the blessing from others. Instead of being generous, they were greedy and selfish. And so my only real point this morning as we read through this parable is this. The man did nothing. He did nothing with his goods. His soul was required of him in the parable before he could do anything. The issue that God took with him was how he thought about the blessing, what he thought he could do with it. So I would ask this question as we wrap up this parable. Am I using money to be rich toward God and others, or is money using me? He believed the lies. Hey, I've got money, now I can rest. I'm going to put it in a barn. I'm going to save it up. And this is what I really want to drive home. I think too often, I'll just be honest with you. I know it's quiet because as we talk about money, everybody's like, there's not many amens in a money message. You know what I'm saying? We need to get out of debt. Amen. What's wrong with you? Are you overwhelmed with debt? We need to be more generous. Praise God. It's just awkward, so I get it. But I'll be transparent with you because I know it's hard to talk about money. In America, we just do not talk about it. It's just one of those things. When I think about money, I rarely think about what I could do for others. You know what I tend to think about? Oh, what I could buy, what I could enjoy. And this is not an excuse, but some of it is because of the media we live in where everything is an advertisement all the time for things I don't have, right? And so your ads are different than mine because I'm a almost 40-year-old male, so all I get are ads for trucks and performance-enhancing drugs for the gym, the legal ones. Right now, I don't know. I haven't done much research in them. Hair loss, I don't know what it knows about me, I'm afraid. I was confessing to one of my brothers and sisters in the room before service that just yesterday, boy, I'm really going to out myself. I had to increase my font size on my phone. Oh. I am in my old man phase, and I am loving it. I said, you know what the worst part was? As soon as I did it, oh, this is so much better. can read everything. But there are constant ways put in front of me on my device to spend money in a way that makes me feel better, makes me look better, makes my commute easier, makes my ride in the car more comfortable. There's all these ways to spend money. And so without intentional thinking, my mind has been wired by our culture to think of money in this way. What would I do? Because I drive by that stinking billboard every day. 100 million, 200 million, sometimes it's 7 million. I always think, boy, when it's 7 million, is no one playing the lottery? Because that's such a little number now. But I always drive by, and the first thing I think, what would I do? And you know what my thoughts never? How much good could I do? It's always, how much damage could I do? The things I could buy. And that's natural. But Jesus wants us to think beyond that. And he wants us to always be thinking this way. Not in the fantasy world of, if I woke up tomorrow and had $10 million. Brothers and sisters, I believe I have a word from the Lord. None of us are waking up tomorrow and discovering $10 million. Now, if you do, please call me. We'll, hey, what did you do different than everyone else? But what we will do tomorrow is we will wake up. We will find ourselves in one of the most prosperous nations on the planet. If you make more than $35,000 a year, you will find yourself in the top 10% of the world earners. Now, I know compared to Americans, that seems low, but in a global scale, we've been blessed. So I want to challenge us to think of money in a different way, and here's what I mean. What if instead of thinking about how you can spend your money on yourself, and there are always going to be things you have to do. You need to provide for your family. You need to take care of your bills. But what if every time we had discretionary money in our hand, we didn't just think, how can I make this about me? What if we sat down and had a plan for how we would bless the Lord, his church, our community, our brothers and sisters around us? Doing some reading and some listening this week, getting ready for this passage, I heard about a college professor in California. He teaches at an Orthodox college, Orthodox Christian college. For years, he's been teaching a class on finance. He refuses to take a salary, but they need to pay him, so he gets paid a penny a semester because he doesn't need the money. He's a wealthy businessman, but he always teaches this class to students. And I heard from a man who sat in that class, and he said the first day he comes in and he sits down and he says, I want to talk to you about the power of money, the hazard of money, and the good things that money can do. He said as a young man, he went to business school and he was pretty sure he was going to get wealthy. He was pretty sure he was going to be successful because he had that drive in him. But he and his wife, they got saved and they sat down and they talked about, what do we need to be satisfied? And so they made a roadmap of, we need, if we had this lifestyle and this type of living, we would never need more. And so they made a commitment to each other. The moment we get there, everything beyond that is not ours. It's the Lord's. And he said within a few years, his business took off. He said the first year they were married, it was hard to live off 90% and tithe 10%. He said, but within just a handful of years, his wife and he were giving away 90% of their income. Because they'd made a commitment. No, we said we don't need a house bigger than this. We said we don't need cars newer than this. We said we don't need, and they created this ceiling. They said we will not go beyond it. And brothers and sisters, that's the exact opposite way most of us think about money. If I had $10 million, how could I spend $9.999 million and give $1 to my friend? He said no. And so he said for years they've lived that way. And what a champion of generosity he's been in his local community. Because he and his wife sat down and said, this is the line that we do not cross. Whereas most of us, we sit down and we say, here's the goal, here's the finish line that once we get there, we want to get here, we want to get there. I'm going to do my best to protect my heart from pride. Jesus said, don't let your left hand know what your right hand does. But at the same time, Paul would often talk personally with the churches about what he did with his money, with his time. Sometimes he was paid, sometimes he wasn't. So I'm going to just share some practical advice that my wife and I have embraced for years that has helped us. We are far from perfect. There are others in the room who have done well with their finances, who are generous toward God. There are some things we've decided we're going to do differently when it comes to money. Number one, my wife and I do our best to talk way more about God and people that we love than we do about money or things around our son. Our kids hear the things we talk about. And if they're raised in a home where all we talk about are things and achievements and stuff and money, there is a message being sent to them that is louder than the things we say on Sunday. I mentioned with you last week, and I put it in the church e-newsletter that went out this week. I shared some practical tips. My wife and I have always lived well below our means so that generosity can be both regular and spontaneous. We don't come to church and fill out a tithe check. Our tithes are always automated. I don't want to think about it. I've prayed about it. We're going to give this much. But then we also want to be spontaneous. My wife and I, we've given to the Pave the Way campaign this year. We've given every year to our, whatever the end of the year offering is, we're going to give to that because we want to have like regular discipline giving, but we also want to have an opportunity to be spontaneous and say, Lord, what would you have us to give? I'm afraid too many of us are either all regular and just, it's all nuts and bolts, or we're just spontaneous and free-flowing and we never sit down and make commitments. The third thing my wife and I do often, we wait and pray long over large purchases to avoid being driven by feelings into debt. Now, I hate to tell you, that's just because we're boring, nerdy researchers who have nothing better to do with our time sometimes. The fourth thing that we do, and we're trying, as my son's 3, to talk with him a little more about this, is we look for opportunities and listen for opportunities to bless others. We got onto my son a few days ago because he didn't finish his dinner. And I said, buddy, I don't want to throw this away. I'm going to put it in the fridge. It's just such a shame to waste food. He said, why? I said, because not everybody has food. He said, why not? I said, some people don't have food in their home. He said, well, then they need to go to the store. Because in his little mind, that card is magic. It's always got money. And number 5, and this is the most important. Best we can, we fix our minds on God and his promises, not our desires, not the latest fads. And this isn't easy. This is why prayer and spending time with God, reading his word, they have to be the foundation of how we think about money in our lives and ourselves. So I think an appropriate response to this parable, to this message, would be for us to ask God to show us, God, how can I use the resources I have? We talked last week about how money convinces you you're strapped. Oh, I'm poor, I don't have any extra money. And sometimes you're in a season of life where you really don't have much discretionary income. But then as we get older, we have more discretionary income, but we don't realize it because things that used to be a luxury become a necessity. Oh, I can't give that up. I mean, we can't live without that. We used to, but now it's just part of our budget. What if we prayed for God to show us how to use wealth in a way that shows our heart, shows our family and our community that we value God and his kingdom more than ourselves and our desires? Now, when I say that, I know that you're thinking, well, but Pastor, I could never afford to do the things I want to do. Let me say this. I think it would be very healthy and good for us to pray over, God, how can I use my current level of wealth, income, influence? And then, God, I'm going to make some commitments that if I ever get the promotions that I'm hoping for, the raises that I'm hoping for, if I get here, I'm not going to let lifestyle creep rob me of the opportunity to be generous in these ways. And so to make commitments with what we have now and even commitments for down the road. And begin praying, God, what would you have me to do? Because here's the question that the rich fool didn't ask. What good could I do with this money? Have you ever sat and thought to yourself, what good could I do with fill in the blank? I think most of us could spend $1 million really quick. I think most of us could spend $10 million really quick. But I don't think many of us give much thought to, how could I do good? Now let's remove the dollar sign. $1 million is cash, but it also represents time. At your current job, it may take you 30, 25, 20, some of you 10, 5 years to make $1 million. Let me ask it this way. What good could you and I do with 5 years? With 15 years? That's the question that Jesus wanted to drive home to these listeners. What good can you do? And then first thing we'll say is, well, I don't have that. I'm under-resourced. God always provides when he calls us to do something good. Years ago when our church started, we made a commitment at the end of the year. In our first year, we were a small church. We said, we're going to take care of best we can, every single mom in our church, not just people who attend, people who are a part of our flock, our body. We're going to give them a few $100s to get through Christmas. Some of them, it wasn't so they could buy gifts. It was so they could keep the lights on. It was so they could keep the car paid. It was just to get them by. And over the years, those numbers have grown, and there's dozens of single moms in our church, in our body that we provide for. We always tell them, you may not need this. Because some of the single moms in our church, they were like my mom. They were working moms. They were getting it done. And my mom, she was the highest paid female at her work when I was a teenager. When I was young, man, it was tough, but she worked her way to the top. We always say to the mom, whether or not you need this, this is yours to do with what you please. And if you know of someone who needs it, pass it on. I remember being an only child with a single mom who was struggling. And God put a desire in my heart at a young age to help in some way. I wasn't resourced at 15 to make a difference, but at 30, I was resourced in such a way where I could help make a difference with our church community. I mentioned to you that I was going to show you one last gift. I was given this gift a few years ago by a director of a church planting organization I worked with. When he gave it to me, I said, what is this? He said, well, these are Roman coins. They date back to around the time of Jesus. They've been discovered all over Europe. They're not worth anything, by the way. Okay, they're not valuable at all. Some of these coins, when they were in circulation, were worth the equivalent of $10 or $20 for us. Some of them were worth a little bit more. This was the currency that people carried. I got to thinking about all the human hands that carried this coin. All the hopes, all the dreams, all the desires, all the, if I just had more of these denarii, if I just had a few more. And then one day, as the parable said, they died and it went from somebody's hand to somebody else's hand. And today they're in my possession and they're of no value. They're worthless. And they're worth maybe a few bucks, but you can get, I looked up last night, on eBay, you can get a towel full of them. Almost 100 pounds for like $100. Thousands of coins. Why? Because they're not valuable anymore. His name is David. David gave me those coins, and he said, this is the thing that everybody was working for. They centered their lives on, and then they died. But he also said, in there is a little widow's mite. He said he likes to think about maybe, just maybe in there, exchanging hands, there might have also been one of those widows that Jesus talked about, like the one who put in all that she had. He said, so not everybody that handles it is handling it the same way. Brothers and sisters, one day we will stop handling money. What good can we do with it now? And lay up treasure not for ourselves here, but be rich towards God. and rich toward God's church, God's people, and honor God with how we refuse to let money take root in our heart. Let's pray.